So I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. John Soos, and he's speaking to us from Vancouver. So he's been awake most of the night, I think, because of the time difference, and it's very early in the morning in Vancouver. So it's a very special effort and commitment in this part. So John is a clinical psychologist in independent practice and a Palestine solidarity activist. He's traveled to Palestine on several occasions as a pilgrim, marathon runner, to assist with the olive harvest, to conduct training seminars for mental health practitioners, and as a human rights worker. And John was a psychology consultant on Harry's film, Gaza Still Alive. So it was actually Harry Fear that introduced me to John. And you've had a few great conversations since then. So I'm very happy to introduce you, John. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see, let me share screen. Just a second. Just a moment. Okay, do you see that all right? There we go.
No, it's not sharing just yet, John, if you could.
Okay, and I don't see myself yet either. Just a second. Yeah, I don't see where it says shared screen right now. Just a moment.
Should be at the bottom of your screen or perhaps at the top.
Yeah, I'm hitting the shared screen. Okay, here we go. Share. Okay, are we making progress?
Yes, we can see your screen.
There. Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah, you have to bear with me a little bit. It's a time lapse here. We were talking with Samiha earlier last year, actually, how it would be difficult for me to make the 12-hour journey with the jet lag. And now we're having a jet lag and I can do it all the way from my home. I would like to, first of all, thank the organizers of the conference, Samiha especially. I was involved with her, and her assistance throughout the process was extremely helpful. I also like to thank Martin for his involvement with bringing us all together. And of course, I'd like to express my gratitude to be a part of this esteemed panel. It was really a tremendous experience to be part of this, and I hope in some small way I can also contribute to the dialogue. Before we go any further, I'd like to make an acknowledgement. Firstly, just to recognize the deep suffering that is taking place in Palestine as we speak. And the timing of the conference is uncanny, really, because this was put together over a year ago. And who would have thought that yet again, we're experiencing the escalation and the deepening re-traumatization of an entire population because of a colonizing illegitimate project. I'd also like to acknowledge that while I like to say that I'm coming to you from my beautiful city of Vancouver, it's a Canadian city on the Pacific coast. We have snow-capped mountains when I look out at my window, but it's also situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the indigenous Coast Salish people, that is the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish First Nations. Why I say this, because it's impossible for me really to honestly talk about Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine without asserting that Canada too has engaged in grave human rights violations against the First Nations people here. Now, while the situation is unfolding in perhaps a favorable way, Canada has in fact embarked on an official path of decolonization and reconciliation with the First Nations people. The Canadian government has publicly apologized for what it actually officially calls having committed cultural genocide. This work of reconciliation is ongoing. That is to say that there are still discrepancies between the health, for example, of First Nations people versus the what we could be called settlers, I suppose. So the Christian white Eurocentric worldview has still negative impact on the indigenous people. But nevertheless, I'm proud to say that while there is a hideous legacy, we are moving as a nation forward in the spirit of decolonization and reconciliation. Israel, regrettably, is marching ahead in the opposite direction. Instead of decolonizing, ending oppression, and promoting the fundamental right to self-determination, apartheid is more entrenched, and the colonies are expanding. And this is resulting in increased psychosocial trauma, the topic that we're here to look at. So I just wanted to mention that a little bit because I think it contextualizes that it's not that Canada is this idealized nation where people live harmoniously together. No, we also have our legacy of settler colonialism. So let's launch into the topic per se. So the title is Resisting Political Violence in Palestine, Adaptive Coping in Face of Continuous Trauma. What I'd like to do is, first of all, how does a Canadian psychologist become involved in Palestine solidarity work? And how did I interweave that with my initial training as a clinical psychologist working in the area of trauma? My background really in trauma is as a health psychologist working in a large teaching hospital on a surgical unit with organ transplant patients. So very far removed, isn't it? Looking at the trauma of facing one's imminent death, then the psychological issue of how do I feel about the idea that my continued life is contingent on the death of another person. And then this began to sort of start me thinking along the parallels between what we're seeing in Palestine and Israel. But let's launch into our presentation now. Okay, so visit Palestine. I initially came to Palestine as a pilgrim, and Samiha mentioned this. So that means to say that I have an interest in the psychospiritual growth that one can obtain from going to sacred landscapes. And in this endeavor, I have traveled really the world and photographed it and wrote about it, continue to do this. I've been to, and some of my slides, maybe I won't show them because it's a limited time, but I have traveled to remote Western Tibet, did the Korah, the 4-day walk around the sacred Mount Kailash, the pilgrimage walk in Spain to Santiago de Compostela. And it was really within this kind of context that I first approached coming to Palestine. I had limited understanding of the political reality, and I came with that perspective. So here I am starting my initial introduction to the topography, the landscape, the sacred landscape of Palestine, when I was walking the Nativity Trail. The Nativity Trail goes from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And as I'm walking on this magnificent landscape, it didn't take long for me to realize that there's something wrong with the idealized biblical narrative that was being presented, at least in my minds, partly orientalized, idealized. But it didn't take long for something to begin to shred this reality. What was that? What was that event? On day 3 or day 4, the person organizing this little pilgrimage said that, well, we're not going to walk today. We're not going to walk today. We're going to all jump into the car, all of us, there's 3 of us, and we're going to drive to the next town. Well, this was puzzling to me because every day we're walking. The whole purpose of the pilgrimage is to walk in the sacred landscape. And why are we now driving? Well, it became apparent after a lot of questioning that something terrible had taken place, and the organizer didn't want the Westerners to become aware of the shadow side of the sacred landscape. Two boys were rummaging through garbage to recycle it and to sell it. And they picked up a piece of metal and they were going to recycle this. The error they made, I say error, was that they were too close to a settlement. The settler felt that this was a weapon that they were going to attack, and two of these boys were shot, killed, as a result of this meaningless altercation. It stunned me, totally stunned me. Again, the initial idea was when I go to Jerusalem, I see world religions harmoniously interweaving, seeking a divine connection, transcending the mundane world and seeking some kind of divine connectedness. This is what I was seeking. However, just looking around the corner, I became aware that there's something, again, decidedly wrong with this picture. How is it possible that barbed wire is interwoven with the image of the sacred? This is representational of what I soon learned was the hideous occupation. So the sacred landscape, which was what I initially came to seek, has been radically transformed. Whoops. The sacred landscape has become a scarred and scared landscape. And this is the heuristic tool that I'm going to use to move my presentation forward. How is it that the transformation has taken place from sacred to scarred and scared? Scarred? Oh, sorry. Scarred means that the land is scarred. The land is scarred by the reality of an ugly, occupying presence. This is the wall that everybody is familiar with, but I want to present it because this is part of my journey of how I began to be socialized into work as a psychologist / activist. Let's take a closer look at the wall, zoom in a little bit, and review for some of us, and perhaps some new information for those of us who are less familiar with the reality of the physicality of the occupation. So this is 760 kilometers in length, twice the length of the 49 Armistice Line. Some of the features that are particularly disturbing, more so than others, is that 85% of the wall is on the West Bank side. What does it mean? It's that it's a concrete manifestation of the colonial Zionist project of stealing land. It's not an ideology only, it's now built in stone, if you will. It's moving around the settlers, protecting the settlers. That is to say, 750,000 illegal, and I put them in quotes because they really are colonizers, are now residing on the Israeli side of the wall. So if you can imagine, the wall is embracing the theft. 12.5% of Palestinians are separated from their own arable land, and 15% of the West Bank's most fertile land is now in the seam zone. What is the seam zone? The seam zone is that space between this hideous construction, the apartheid wall, and the so-called green line. So what it means is that the land is being stolen, but the most precious, most arable land where there's water and where vegetation can thrive. So again, on the top here, the title, I just use these three words, again, to show the colonization of the narrative. Because there's a difference if you call it a security wall. Gee, who wants to argue with the need of people to remain secure in their land? Separation wall gets closer to the idea. Apartheid wall is unequivocally stating the reality of what it is that we are seeing. This is another manifestation of the nature of colonized landscape, the oppressive landscape. In Walaja, what are we seeing here is the wall is entombing a family. This is a project that North American, well, I should say American taxpayers are paying, but Canadians are not innocent in this because we give unconditional diplomatic immunity for the continued colonization. What was threatening the persons responsible for creating the wall was that on this side where I'm pointing here is a settlement, and heaven forbid that the two intermesh or have a chance to meet. Well, we build the apartheid wall. Now we're moving again to Hebron. This is just to show again how the architecture of hate is utilized to further dispossess people of their land and to further traumatize, because we're talking about trauma as an ongoing manifestation of the occupation. And we'll explain a little bit more the idea of how PTSD is an irrelevant nomenclature within this context. But I just wanted to illustrate this with some of these photographs. Some of these photographs where you have to go through checkpoints, where you have to go through these barriers. And this gentleman, because I like to humanize it, after all, we are psychologists and psychiatrists, mental health workers. So we must recognize that there are people who are impacted purposefully by this scarred landscape, resulting in scared people. Somehow the sacred has really been diminished in this process. This gentleman is explaining to me that his front door has been bolted shut so that this 86-year-old gentleman cannot leave his house from the front door in Hebron, where there are, let me check my notes for a moment, 4 Israeli soldiers for 1 illegal settler. So there's 33,000 Palestinians and 700 Jewish Israelis protected in this H2 so-called Hebron, a part of Hebron. And the point here being that this gentleman is precluded from going out to the main street, Shehuda Street, because, well, it's a threat to one of those 400 settlers. Magnificent picture of olives. Another form of resistance. To exist is to resist. We'll talk about the slogan in a minute and what it means. But the olive harvest and planting olive trees. Why might I be, or why might some of us be interested in helping out with the olive harvest? Well, in 2020, Israeli settlers destroyed at one time 600 olive trees. November 2020, 1,000 olive trees elsewhere were harvested illegally by settlers, stolen. Since 2001, 550,000 olive trees have been purposefully vandalized and destroyed. And why? Well, olives are an enduring symbol of Palestinian steadfastness, resilience, and attachment to the land. The people are rooted to the land, as is the ancient olive. The Zionist settler colonial project wants to uproot the Palestinian. The demographic threat, so-called, to the aims of the land theft and Judaization of Palestine with their ongoing spreading malignant settlements. So what happens? Here I am, and this is not to boast because I had a terrible time. It's extremely difficult. You can see the land is very, very rocky. This gentleman on my left is the owner of the land. And a small group of internationals had come by to help plant small olive seedlings. I see this as a community psychological project to maintain hope, to express solidarity, and perhaps most importantly, to enable this tree planting project to continue in face of settler colonial violence. It took 10 minutes from that previous idyllic picture for this gentleman here with his weapon to phone the police. Why? That fence at the top of the photograph separates the Palestinian gentleman's land from beyond that, as you can probably see in the distance, is a new settlement. The settler, and you can imagine this experience, you are planting trees, nurturing the soil, and the direct antithesis, the most violent opposing narrative descends upon the picture, disrupts it entirely, and he starts harassing us. But not only he, the settler, but here we begin to see the collusion between the settler and the occupying military. The settler becomes a proxy soldier. It didn't take long for his buddies to come by. The entire military, it felt like at the time, shows up. Here's the gentleman owning the land. We had to go through an entire lengthy process whereby, and again, the dehumanization, the violence, the lack of freedom, and we'll talk about Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What rights do the Palestinians have under occupation? The right to land, the right to ownership. Well, I have then become re-identified as a colluder, potential terrorist. And I have to have 4 soldiers watching every move. So imagine if a Westerner has to experience this while we're filming it, the purpose of which is to protect the Palestinian landowners, what it's like when there is no observing Western presence, and a hideous thing that this is even necessary. But as it sometimes happens, it started to rain. God was on our side. The rain chased the settlers, the soldiers away for some reason. The ancient olive trees glistened in their magnificent dew-covered glory, and the rainbow was there just to add to the perfection of the scene. A small victory of resistance. This picture is of the Gaza Marathon. And please don't get me wrong, this is not to diminish the current horror of what we're seeing in Gaza. I'm using this as an example of first of all, how did one get into Gaza? I had to have a UN invitation, and the only way I was able to do that was by participating in the first international Gaza Marathon. There was 12 of us, 12 Westerners, internationals, I guess is the word we use. The reason I point this out, though, is because we're talking about Gaza. The horror, the bombardment, and the trauma of Gaza is evermost in our mind now as the beleaguered people are being bombarded again. But what is Gaza? How big is Gaza? Well, for all of you who are runners, understand that a marathon is 42 kilometers. And the 42 kilometers in this case is the entire length of Gaza. Picture that. I ran the entire length of Gaza, and it then tells you, helps perhaps this picture and this little story, helps us understand the nature of the so-called open air prison and how some people use the crude metaphor like shooting fish in a barrel. When you have the bombing and they have people have no room to escape. And they talk about Israel has the right to defend itself. Certainly in bomb and shelters, all manner of protection. Where does the Gazan Palestinian go? Nowhere. There is no escape. I just took this picture to demonstrate that the current casualty, and I think it's gone up since then, regrettably, at early May 10th, whenever, I'm sorry with the time difference, there's 109. Unfortunate, sad situation continues. This picture, again, it depicts the idea of continuous ongoing trauma. I took this picture in 2016, 2016, when I was doing the work with the Gaza Community Mental Health Center and the PTC. But what does it mean? This could have been taken yesterday. Again, to humanize, to recognize, and to blast through the narrative that the Hamas terrorists, no, this old lady, this gentle, peaceful lady, may have been living in that home. Allow that to sink in. Put these two images together. It illustrates deeply the profound nature of the violence that is continuously exerted, that people are subjected to, and this is why we must continue our resistance support. This is just to illustrate that part of what we were doing at that point is working as a human shield. That is to say, human shield in a positive way, preventing the soldiers on the other side of the border to shoot the farmers. And why is my life more valuable than his life in the eyes of an Israeli colonizing soldier? It's absolutely preposterous. It's meaningless, and it's exceedingly racist, and it's manifestly disturbing. The Nakba is now. We will hear this phrase a number of times, and we have. But again, was this picture taken in after the first bombardment that we're aware of? Was it Kasled? Was it yesterday? Why is this permitted to continue? Imagine if that was my home or your home or anyone's home. Imagine his home. Imagine his psychological processing of this program. And that this is not a natural catastrophe. This is not a tsunami. This is not an earthquake. This is the result of people sitting down and planning the vicious annihilation of a people, the genocide of a people. Sometimes the experience is most accurately expressed poetically. The mythopoetic language is more accurate to describe deep processes. Houses are murdered just as their inhabitants are killed, and the memories of things are slaughtered. Wood, stones, glass, iron, mortar, scattered like human limbs. This is what we see in our television screens today. It was written by Mahmoud Darwish. Again, we don't need to be psychoanalysts to see the meaning of this picture. Comfort, security, safety, the kitten in the blanket, the children smiling and holding each other, an incredible depiction of childhood innocence. And yet, imagine what they must internalize and work through. Playing in a cage within a cage. This is again a picture of Gaza that I took not that long ago. So let's talk a little bit about home demolitions, because this is what we're seeing here. The immeasurable pain of home demolitions. From 1947 to 48, what we're referring to now as the Nakba, and what we're celebrating today, not celebrating, forgive me, commemorating. Remember, I've been up since 2 a.m. 52,000 homes have been demolished and 531 destroyed, depopulated villages. Since 1967, the occupation of the rest of Palestine, 56,000 Palestinian West Bank homes were demolished. And yet at the same time, when we're talking about colonization and expansion of the Zionist project, destroying 56,000 Palestinians' homes in Palestine in order to build 94,000 buildings constructed for 630,000 Jewish settlers. What kind of madness are we seeing here? And why are we permitting it? We, our governments, and by our silence, and why we must continue to stand up and vigorously protest. December 2008 to January 2009, so-called Operation Cast led, 4,247 homes demolished, 1,417 Palestinians killed in the process, 13 Israelis killed. All lives are precious, as they say, and as we feel, as mental health providers, as healthcare providers, but there's something wrong with the lack of symmetry. 2012, 167 Palestinians killed, 6 Israelis killed. Operation Protective Edge, the more recent one, 2014, 18,000 homes destroyed purposefully, 60,000 people made homeless. Again, we see the death process, and it's ongoing. It's ongoing. We are now seeing the situation in Sheikh Jarrah, and the Gaza is under attack right as we speak again. And yet, what do people really want? What do people want? Whoops, sorry. I was trying to remove, there we go. What people want is, and again, this picture is a little graffiti, or a little, let's call it street art, perhaps more accurately. But it depicts what a person wants. Doesn't want a demolished home, wants to see some light, wants a roof over their head, wants to share love, basically wants the fundamental human right to live. And speaking of human rights, let's look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we see that the right to own property, Palestinians don't have this right. Movement in and out of the country, Palestinians don't have this right. Considered innocent until proven guilty, Palestinians are denied that right. And we can go through all of them. Right of equality, freedom from discrimination, the right to life, liberty, and personal security, freedom of arbitrary arrest and exile. All of these rights are not available for the Palestinian under the occupation. We must resist this vigorously. So PTSD. Now, previous speaker explained this perhaps better than I can, but I will go through it as well if you allow me to. PTSD is wrong nomenclature within the context of occupation. As has been pointed out, nothing post, and there's no disorder. I say no disorder because the psychiatric clinical psychology terminology looks at intrapsychic. Something is wrong with me. I'm vulnerable. I'm weak. I have a mental illness. But let's look at this. Let's look at our little list here and look at what is it that the Palestinian living under Israeli occupation and apartheid is experiencing, the stressor, as it were. Criminalization and erasure of identity. Crimes of apartheid, persecution, and colonization. This is recently in the news. Water apartheid. Why is it that 80% of the water in occupied Palestine goes to the settlers, while the Palestinian, indigenous Palestinian, is allowed to access 20% of the water? COVID-19 vaccine apartheid. The world is looking at Israel, 60% of the population is vaccinated. 3.5% of the Palestinians were accessing vaccine. Israeli settlements, settler violence, separate legal system, racist laws, movement restrictions, discriminatory access to education, health services, drones, bombs, white phosphorus, poverty and hopelessness. This is not a one-off event. Like I drive over Vancouver Bridge, I see a horrible accident. I've developed a symptom, fear of driving over the bridges, phobic avoidance. I see my therapist, maybe using a cognitive behavior intervention. We work through an imaginal rehearsal. In 2-3 weeks, I'm back to my pre-morbid situation and I'm driving gleefully across the bridge. It's over with. This is obviously not what we're seeing here. Turn on the water, screams the graffiti artist. The injustice is palpable. So the oppression is the trauma. The arbitrary arrest, executions, mass killings, posthumous degradation, where the child shot dead at the checkpoint is taken to the morgue and frozen in weird contorted positions so that a natural grieving cannot even be permitted, further deepening the psychotic, hideous nature of punishment. People cannot even imagine this. It's like a horror movie. When I first heard about this in the most recent US UK-Palestine Mental Health Network delegation, October 2019, it's astounding to us. Night raids, child abductions, land confiscation, the olive harvest, criminalization of fishing and farming in Gaza. Imagine the farmers are being shot, the fishermen. When I was out supporting the fishermen, and incidentally, that was one of the reasons why I went to the Gaza Marathon, to help with the Canada boat to Gaza, breaching the occupation, the inability of people accessing Gaza from the outside world, the blockade, making some connections there. So to exist is to resist. Or I should be stopping soon, sorry. Resistance is resilience. The ongoing socio-political violence, that is the occupation, is the trauma, and resistance is therapeutic. So we cannot depoliticize or decontextualize the psychological distress of the Palestinians. Palestinian mental health providers experience continuous dual trauma. It's going into Gaza to do the workshop. Maybe I'll move on here. Traumatic stress. The point I want to make especially uniquely here is the idea of dual trauma. That the Palestinian mental health worker is psychologically injured by the trauma that all the Palestinians in Gaza were experiencing. Then the vicarious trauma of the stories that they hear from their clients. And then the combination of this is the unique nature of the dual trauma. So they respond to the vicarious trauma that they experience from their clients and the ongoing trauma that their clients too experience. Vicarious trauma workshop. This is the workshop that we put together. It was a 30-hour workshop, so we'll go through it in 5 minutes if I can still do that. Is that okay?
You've got about 2 minutes. Can you do it?
2 minutes. Okay, then we'll speak fast and we'll speak in a pointed fashion.
Fantastic.
So, okay, 2 minutes. Very good. So what are the signs of vicarious trauma? Cognitive, poor concentration, withdrawn, guilt, musculoskeletal pain, compromised immunity, existential issues of hopelessness. These are some of the work that the Gaza Community Mental Health was doing, and I think was portrayed in Harry's film, where children are expressing some of their experiences through their toys and how the trauma of the occupation is interfering with the normal childhood. Healing the wounded healer. Some of the experiences that the therapists that we're working with. I became a vegetarian after seeing dismembered bodies in the streets. Their flesh looked like meat. My house broken into by soldiers and turned upside down. We were all threatened. My youngest child was mute for 3 days. Our adolescent boy was arrested and removed at gunpoint. The charge? He had memorized the Quran. Again, it shows you the impact of the trauma of the occupation. So I have a minute, and I'm going to now talk about what is it that we do to help deal with the trauma of secondary vicarious trauma that the therapist experiences. So we need to destigmatize the idea of that therapists are traumatized. It's because of our compassion and our understanding of other people's suffering that we are open to the suffering of others, and then this traumatizes us. So it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of compassion. We need to support one another. We need to eat well. We need to not smoke. We need to not substance abuse. Practicing relaxation techniques. Clarify our thinking. Relaxation techniques, I have a minute left. I'd like to talk about, one of the interventions we did was we took a hypnotic script and translated it into Arabic and had the therapist read this into their phones. So when they were experiencing anxiety, they were able to refer to a calming, soothing intervention. We talk about post-traumatic growth, and I'd like to end on this, that the idea that some good personal growth can come from suffering is an ancient idea. Philosophers and religions all talk about it. So part of this is to assert that this is Palestine, that children in face of horror can still, with the assistance of therapy, retain their childhood, reframe and resist the occupying apartheid wall by making it into a stage to play rock and roll music, reframe by moving from the tear gas canister into the hope of the floral reflooring of the new world. And then this, I like to end with this. When I first went to Palestine, this was Jimmy Carter's tree. And it was very small. And he said, His Excellency Jimmy Carter, President of the United States, planted this tree as a symbol of peace in the region in 2009. A few years later, a little improvement beginning to flourish. And we can see that there is indeed some hope perhaps for future and an end for the suffering that we see. And I'd like to just underscore the importance of all of us to continue with our boycott on divestment and sanctions, and to continue working on behalf of the freedom of the Palestinian people. Okay, thank you very much. I'll probably end that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Just going to stop the share, and we're just working on getting all the participants in, all the speakers, for a panel discussion. So Martin, where are you? You're going to be moderating this. There he is. All right, great. So we've got some questions already in the chat box for you, Martin, that have come in throughout the day. And if anyone else has got any questions for any of the speakers, that they're all going to be gathered here. Hopefully most of them, I'm going to add them all in. And then now's the time. So please do post your questions in there, especially for John Soos, because we didn't have a chance to do a Q&A with him. So over to you, Martin.
Let's see, okay.
Well, it's quite a daunting process to try and read new questions and be confronted by such a high-powered panel.
Oh, here.
Thank you very much, John, for that. That was astonishing and wonderful presentation.
Yeah, sorry for running a little bit late at the end, but I think it's the jet lag, the COVID-19 in-house jet lag and time frame. It's 9 a.m. for me. I started at 2, so you can apologize for that.
Okay, I haven't actually had time to read these questions yet, but I'm trying to think. Mohammed, could I ask you a question that's going back to terminology for a moment? The question about occupation versus apartheid versus, I think, settler colonialism. And I wondered if you have any thoughts about, the meaning or the implications of what words we use. You're muted.
So your question about what I see the meaning of the occupation, or
the meaning of the words that we use to describe the situation. We've had a conversation about whether apartheid should replace occupation. I wondered if you had any thoughts about.
Yeah. I think, this is very sensible and very mindful to think like that. The occupation is not just normal occupation. If it's just normal, ordinary occupation, like a British occupation or French occupation to other countries, when you do some resistance and put pressure on them, they will leave. But we are in Palestine, we have a cancer. You can't, if you wish it, just will go away. We need to remove it. That's the only solution, which is apartheid, occupation. This could be one of the good things you already mentioned, but not just, I'm against just normal, ordinary occupation, it doesn't apply to the Palestinians. They stole our lands. And now we are struggling to live in small, scattered areas. And they found it's big for the Palestinians to live. Even in the small, they stole everything. That's why the Palestinians now, especially in Gaza also, very angry. And I spoke to my families and relatives and friends. They said, if we die all, but we will not let this happen again and again. We try to resist the noise, and now these wars in 2008 and now 12 and 14 and now 21. And then what will happen? Shall we go back to the siege again? And we are people in Gaza, especially in whole Palestine, they are suffering. But the scale of suffering in Gaza, you can't describe it. It's people, they are dying, but death and live and life is come to maybe similar. And maybe some of you, like John, he went there, and Harry Fear, and he and Maria saw how is that huge hopeless and frustration and anger there, because nothing changed. They just situation getting worse and worse. That's my comment on that.
I should say that I'm sorry that Samara is not here. I don't know if she's around at all, but Asra sent a message saying that because of the number of arrests that were taking place in her locality, that she's had to leave and go and support the families involved. So that sort of reduces us to some degree. Let's address. I think perhaps I could ask Harry this question. In these discussions, there hasn't been much mention about Hamas. Is it good to have Hamas present or not? If Hamas stopped, would the Israelis stop? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, that's a really heavy question. Hope you can hear me okay. Well, I think instead of sort of giving my analysis or opinion, I'll just start off with something I heard a couple of days ago from a Bethlehemite Palestinian, a friend, who was saying that Hamas is only existed for a couple of decades in comparison to the conflict existing for several decades, and that Hamas is a manifestation or a symptom of an ugly problem. And if Hamas were to go away, the occupation would still exist, the settler colonialist dynamic would still exist, and all of that. If I may just very briefly just add a comment of my own then to that, given the context that we have this week, the situation is quite interesting because as one Palestinian analyst said, you have a battle of wills between two entities, the Palestinian fighters and the Israeli state. And there are political contexts which are deeply cynical and depressing to discuss in both camps. But certainly what's interesting that we're seeing kind of emanating from this escalation is what some analysts are calling a kind of unified Palestinian uprising, not an intifada, but a kind of uprising, multifaceted at the borders within Israel proper, in the West Bank, in occupied Jerusalem, and from and in Gaza. And so this is qualitatively a development and qualitatively different to what we have seen over the last several years or the last couple of Gaza escalations. And it does have the potential to somehow, and God knows we don't know, change the underlying dynamic of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Thank you for that. I'm also thinking that you might have really quite penetrating questions to ask one another. So if anyone wants to ask a question, you could put your hand up and I could see you. I would like I'd like to ask Ruchama if she could say something more about the weakness of the left, and what sort of pressures, what is preventing, if you like, some of the messages from getting through, and why is the left so weak in Israel? You're muted, Ruchama. Can you not unmute? Unmute? Perhaps somebody could unmute you. Could Dee unmute you?
I can only ask her to unmute, which I've done, but hopefully that's popped up a message, Doctor, that you can click. Perhaps while we're waiting, Martin, you might want to ask another question.
Yeah. I'm really sorry that
yeah, now
here we go.
It's okay?
Yeah, it's good now.
Okay, but anyway, I'm not sure I follow why the left is weak.
Yes. Is there any, I'm not sure if you, I mean, you talked about it feeling very isolated, I think.
The left doesn't exist. It's not weak, not strong, no nothing. So I can't answer this question. There is a very, very, very small real left, which you can count on one hand or maybe two hands. But no one is talking about them. I mean, it's talking about people like me. We don't exist. But the left, in Israel, when you say left, everyone understands and means the Zionist left. So but there is no one to talk to. I mean, they are not left, not right, no nothing.
I see that Esther, I don't think Esther is with you anymore. You mentioned that she was organizing a group called Joining Resistance. Is that a mental health group, or is it a broader movement?
It is first of all political group, then it is yes, professional group, but no professionals who are not really political people will or can join this group. But we are not a party, we are 7 women. Maybe it's a secret, the number, but I don't care. So we do not exist in national terms. We exist very much. Each and every one is a brilliant person. But it's not a number, it's not power, it's no nothing. And we are not going to be a big something. We don't have an office. We are not going to collect funds, which means money, of course. We are not going to do anything of this kind of politics. We are writing, we are thinking, we are talking, and above all, we are in real solidarity, not a kind of slogan. We are in a real solidarity with Palestinian friends. That's what we are doing.
Mm.
Will it change the whole thing? No. No.
It's important to keep the threads of thought and understanding and thinking and writing alive. I think.
Yeah, it's important. It's good, and it takes a lot of time and effort. But it's okay. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. No one is paying for it, and no one will pay for it. And this is not the direction anyway. But it's not possible to talk about it in terms of weak and strong.
No.
We are beyond those things, or underneath those things. Anyway, we are not there. Did I explain myself?
That's really, yeah, it's good. It's helpful. I'm pleased to get a sense of what the group is doing.
Yeah.
Maria and John, could I ask you about, I know you're both clinicians and you're both committed. Does your work, I mean, clearly in a way on John's side, I think it does, but what kinds of solidarity work are you actually able to undertake in your localities or organizations or professions? Perhaps I could ask Maria first.
Firstly, can I clarify, I'm not a clinician, I'm a trainer. And also I'd just love to mention, John said something very significant in his talk when he talked about PTSD not being a disorder. And I really, really agree with him. It is not a disorder, it is a survival mechanism. And trauma is not processed. So I think what you said, John, is really, really important there. And it's a widely bandied around term. And I totally agree with you with that. Going back to your question about solidarity, I think by supporting local people and empowering local people on the ground to address their needs of their immediate community through training, enabling them to, and they know best what is needed. You know, these therapies that we develop in England or whatever, how appropriate are they in Gaza? Who are we to say?
Cool.
So it's up to them. It's good to empower them to make that choice as to whether or not they use those. How are they going to develop their project, their clinic for their community?
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. I'm sort of picking up as well on Samar's point about the need for Palestinian resistance to be sustained by international solidarity work, and it being something of our responsibility. I'm not trying to land anybody with a sense of their own personal responsibility, but collectively we have a sort of a responsibility to try and, well, to address this. And so I'm just interested in linking up different examples of that, or any experiences that people have. So I wonder if, John, you might describe what happens in Canada.
Yeah, Canada is a difficult situation because it's hypocritical when it comes to the Palestine-Israel situation. It likes to present itself as this peacekeeping nation, that we're adhering to high moral values, and yet it's a facade to some degree. The Canadian government, through various, even the left wing, I guess, which is not dissimilar to what happened in the UK, has mouthed the usual sentiments of, we are a rule-bound nation and we respect international law, and yet they give unconditional support to Israel whenever the situation arises in an international forum. So we have a difficult stance because we present to ourselves even that we are a just society, and yet there is this collusion with the forces of occupation and apartheid. On a smaller level, what we do, I say we, the activists here, we engage in the BDS campaigns. So we have small targeted boycott, divestment, and sanction campaigns. For example, there's an ongoing one now, don't toast apartheid. And we have slogans, and we go to liquor stores and we picket in front of them at times, saying that people should not buy Israeli wine that's called made in Israel, when in fact it's produced in occupied Palestine. So these are little small actions, but they're getting some traction. In terms of mental health, however, I have not been very successful, and maybe I should reach out to Martin or to our US colleagues and look at how you folks are moving into the mental health field in a larger, more organized way. I give talks to raise public awareness in public forums, but have I made a presentation to the Canadian Psychology Association? No. And perhaps this is because I don't see any support. I mean, I'm like a lone wolf, really. And that's a problem. I'm howling on my own like a lunatic in the moon. And there's no one really to reach out to in terms of support. I mean, I could stand on the street corner, and in fact, I will do that. Another support, after I leave this forum here, we're going to the Nakba demonstration. I'm going to speak there. Small little talk, but there'll be a big audience, and I'll there interweave the psychological trauma of the occupation, which will likely be new to most people. So basically, these are small gestures in terms of organizational involvement with the Canadian mental health community. I have to say I have not done a whole lot. That's a euphemism for really nothing.
Well, just to share a thought with you, happy if anyone else wants to chip in here. When we held the first meeting of the UK Mental Health Network, at which Mohammed Altawil was one of our speakers, that's when we first met. We got about 60 people together. Mm-hmm. It was a very powerful meeting. I remember leaving feeling that we'd really established, we'd really made a step. Really, it's really invigorating, if you like. Mm-hmm. There was a question there about how much support does Israel have amongst professionals? And one speaker said, well, 80% of mental health workers support Israel. I don't think that was ever true. My impression is that most people know there's something seriously wrong. Most people think there's something seriously wrong. I think there are small numbers of people who are very identified with and supportive of Israel, and make it quite difficult for this seam of opinion to get expressed and explored. I just wonder if you think that's the same in Canada, or do you think that it might be a misconception, but that's still my impression.
I don't know. So your impression is that the mental health community is actually far more pro-Palestinian than we are customarily thinking about this problem? I
think that they're far more aware there's a problem. I wouldn't say that that you would necessarily describe people as pro-Palestinian. I think they think there's something seriously wrong. Mm-hmm. And that simply, and that the media and everything else doesn't actually I don't think people believe the media totally. Right. Of course, we're all confused by it. We're all thrown off by the incessant misrepresentations and so on.
Well, I think there's a change in this country. For example, just the other day, the leader of the NDP, the New Democratic Party, which is our sort of social democratic party, made a revolutionary statement, really, for a mainstream Canadian party, saying that Canada should withhold arms sales to Israel until it adheres to international and humanitarian law. Immediately, this brings up the whole barrage of anti-Semitism, and Canada must stand behind its ally. But still, there's a crack opening here, and I think it's important. And when you look at public health, public interest surveys, more and more people are beginning to recognize that there's something seriously wrong with the Israeli project vis-a-vis Palestine. So there's a growing awareness. Whether that's translated into our respective professional communities, I really haven't had my finger on the pulse of that. And perhaps I should ask, maybe give a talk. I mean, well, we could talk about this more later, Martin, perhaps, how to move forward in terms of organized mental health organizations and introduce, an awareness of the occupation and the impact on the populace and our role, because I mean, our ethical principles are being jeopardized if we don't. I mean, we have an obligation to prevent harm. We have an obligation to speak out where there's injustice. We've all agreed, we've all signed on to this, and yet we're not enacting it.
No.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the very beginning of the day, we now have this, a letter we're calling the Do No Harm letter, trying to exactly pull up on this, on this question.
Yeah, very important. I mean, I look forward to reading it and to engaging with the document and the people behind it.
We, some years back, we met with Omar Barghouti, and he said at the time, well, you must try and get, obviously your organizations are not going to suddenly come out in favor of BDS, but you need to sort of start putting resolutions to AGMs. And we always found that very difficult, very difficult. So a lot of the work that we do takes place outside of the organizational structures. Interestingly, the response to Black Lives Matter has been that mental health organizations have suddenly taken on the idea that they need to address their internal racism, and the racism is implicit in their organizational structures, their training structures and curriculum, their theory, their theoretical constructions, and so forth. And this has, in some degree, opened up a forum for the question about, well, what about other forms of, what about contemporary racism generally? What is the relationship between historical colonialism and contemporary colonialism? And how does this bring in the issue of Palestine and so on? So, but it is difficult to get inside the thinking and working of our professional associations. I want to go back.
Can I just jump in, Martin? There's a question from the audience. It's from Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed Al-Tawil and the other panelists, what do you guys think of the Arab League, their role in this matter? Any thoughts?
I should just say that Mohammed has had to leave, so it would be for the other panelists.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on the Arab League and their role in this matter?
I'm not sure if anyone here is really qualified to address that.
I don't think we're left with any Arabs live with their picture. Perhaps Diana can say something.
I think it's outside my area of expertise.
That's above my pay grade. I did have a question. I am going to jump in like this all-sync being and ask, I was really interested in John Soos. You talked a lot about, we touched on this before, but about the geography. My dad always used to tell me that Israel really wanted the geography without the demography.
Right.
You touched on that with talking about the seam zone and so forth, and also about the semantics, the importance of, it might not sound like it makes that much of a difference, but calling it a security fence versus an apartheid wall, that does make a big difference, doesn't it? So I would love for you to sort of talk a little bit more about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, well, I think we're talking, I mean, the whole theme of the conference really is colonization of the mind. And I think the idea of the linguistic implications of colonizing the mind is part of what we're seeing here. And the referring to the structure as an apartheid wall tells us that we're Palestine solidarity activists and we see it for what it is. Calling it a security wall deflects the situation entirely, projects the blame onto the victim, basically it's blaming the victim mentality. So I think it's very important that we choose our words correctly, because oftentimes the words can be misused completely. I mean, I was reading the newspaper the other day, well, online paper, I have to say, and it's always Hamas militants. Why is militant an adjective that's applied to Palestinians who are asserting their right for self-determination and the right to defend against an incredible oppressive militarized bombardment? We never say the Israeli terrorists. There Israeli soldiers defending their country. But I've never seen Palestine being described as a Palestinian who is protecting him or herself or is fighting for her right. It's always Palestinian militant. Why do we have to call one a militant and the other one is just a regular person? So this is another use of language that has a profound impact in terms of how we frame, how we think about, and how we analyze the situation. And the question you had about the demography versus geography, this wasn't my own idea. I have to quote our friend Mazen Kumsiye. He's the one who I think initially introduced me to that very, very pithy way of saying in 3 words the entire colonial Zionist project. Basically, what does it mean? It means that the forceful, consciously thought through plan to displace people, to deny their existence, and to create a Zionist colony. So we want the geography, that means we want the land of Palestine. But you know what? We're not really crazy about the indigenous inhabitants there because we want to replace them with the settlers, the settler colonial. And we saw that in one of my slides. The demography is demonstrated in the sheer numbers of how many houses, how many Palestinian homes are demolished and how many new settler colony homes are being built, 2, 3, 4 to 1, and what percentage of housing permits are afforded to Palestinians in the West Bank? Is it under 1%? So that's an example of that.
Rukama, thank you very much. Sorry, can I just ask Rukama? She had her hand up a little while back.
Yeah, it's just a remark. The real name, it's real name not only because this is the name, but it's also the correct name is the separation wall. Mm-hmm. And the separation wall is the ground, the basis of apartheid.
Right. Yeah.
This is what the word means. So why to search for all kinds of other names which do not give the real essence, the real meaning of this wall? It's a separation wall. Mm-hmm. And if you ask me, this is what it should be called.
That's interesting. That's interesting, Rukama, because there isn't anything.
I can't hear you. I don't know why your voice is jumping.
It's a little bit fuzzy now.
Okay. Is that better?
Did you say?
I was.
Hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing against the law in separating things, is there? But apartheid is against the law. It's a criminal state. So although the word means the same thing,
yes,
one name does convey
but
that.
Not the safety wall.
Apartheid, the security wall. The security wall is the greatest.
In the same direction, and
okay,
that's more or less the same. But
thanks for that. Harry, will you say something?
Not safety wall.
Yeah, Martin, thank you. I just have a couple of comments and kind of open questions for everyone, really, and particularly for Rukama. Thank you for your speech earlier. I struggled a little bit to hear it, so I'm looking forward to perhaps reading the text of the speech at some point in much more detail with a tooth comb, because I found it mind-blowingly illuminating to have that level of analysis into the Israeli mindset. As a journalist, I'm interested in how the yeah, the methodology of psychoanalysis or looking at things from the mental health perspective can help explain the behaviors of individuals and states. And so that's why I made partially the mental health documentary in Gaza. In that kind of investigation, we learned about the notion of learned helplessness in the Gaza situation and in respect of military conflict. This week, we hear from Netanyahu, for example, and from the Israeli government or the Israeli ministers or acting ministers, we hear talk about restoring calm and restoring quiet, which is understandable. It's a reference to the cessation of rocket fire from Gaza. It's understandable. But I wondered if you could comment on this language and if this has any obvious psychoanalytical comments to make, because it seems to me that perhaps, and I have no idea, I'm not an expert on this, but you are, whether there is some kind of overlap between this concept of learned helplessness and restoring quiet. In other words, is the Israeli side trying to put the Palestinians in Gaza back into a state of learned helplessness, is my essential question.
I hope I could follow you. I'm not sure, but it's not a real language. They are keeping the calm or restoring the calm and so on. It's one cannot seriously argue with those words. What does it mean? I mean, if I can talk politically and not professionally, restoring the calm means that I'm talking on behalf of the Palestinians, as if you shut up restoring the calm, we, the Israelis, can continue doing whatever we used to do and we want to do and we will do, and no one will disturb us. So shut up. And everything is fine, is calm. But if you are going to become terrorist, which means to use all kinds of resistance against your jail, your prison, then we can bomb you again. As this wonderful general of us, he's now the second prime minister. His passion is, I quote him, to bring back Gaza to the Stone Age. He's saying it time and again. I'm not sure that he knows anything about the Stone Age as archaeologist or scientific, but it means something to him. The Stone Age means no modern high buildings, no towers, no nothing, be crawling on earth or in caves. Do not dare to be modern, to take a real part in the world now. This is calm. So I cannot argue with those words, because even the opposite of what it says is not true. The whole concept is a kind of a false concept. And I don't think it's worthwhile trying to understand it professionally in psychoanalysis terms and so on. It's trash, it's bullshit. What does it mean, calm? Crawling on the earth without houses.
I'm going to I'm going to link that. I'm going to link that. I don't know if you agree with me, Rukama, but at the beginning of the day, I was suggesting that there was something inherently brutal in settler colonialism, and that this brutality is projected into its victims, into the colonized, who can then be, you know, there's a necessity to demonize the victims. And what you've just described, it seems to me to illustrate that perfectly. I mean, that is such an uncivilized position to take, isn't it? There is such a lack of humanity or lack of refinement or whatever moral sense in being able to speak in that way, and yet with the conviction that what you're doing is talking about a less civilized group than yourself. I'm going to draw this to an end, this conversation. It's 5:30, we're right on time, and I'm going to pass over to Samiha to conclude our proceedings. Thank you ever so much for coming.
Samiha, can I send to you my presentation?
Please do. Send it to me.
So everyone can take it from you. Is it okay?
You send it to me, I'll make sure that you understand whatever I do with the text, Rukama.
I will tell you. What do you mean?
I'll share it with the speakers.
Yes.
And then consult with you about any other use of the text.
Yeah, but don't distort it. Distort it.
I won't rewrite it.
Good.
Samia.
So this it's been a long day, but a fantastic one. So I'm very happy to bring this to a close now. So first of all, I want to say what a fantastic event this has been. I've been reading the chat box throughout the event, and the feedback has been amazing. I'm completely bowled over by the quality of the discussions, the quality of the presentations. You know, some speakers coming to us from right in the middle of the situations you've been describing. Several delegates have been commenting on their courage and saluting the courage and the work that our speakers are doing. I'm also very impressed by the diversity of the voices. We've had very young speakers. We've had speakers from all over the world, from different backgrounds and experiences. But I think what brings us all together is that we're working towards the same goal and with the same values. So at the end of these events, because we organize Friends of Palestine, and at the end, in real life events, people always come up to us at the end and say, I feel so powerless, what can I do? And when you look at how extreme and enduring the events that have been described are, and the war on the mind is in the situation, you do feel that, powerless, and there's not helpless, and that there's not very much you can do. And what I would really like to emphasize is that there's a lot that we can do. So what can we do? So what can I do to help? So the first one that I'd like to emphasize is the donate aspect. So all the speakers at this conference have very generously given their time for free. But what they have asked is that for any profits that the conference makes to be divided up between all the speakers and allocated to a charity of their choice, or a charity or a project. So you've been receiving information about these projects in the chat box. And I will also send you the list of different charities and organizations after the conference, if you do want to donate more, which I would urge you to do, because with what they're facing at the moment, they really, really need any help they can get. I know some of those organizations are really struggling. So any way any contribution that you can make, especially now, will be very gratefully received, I'm sure. The second one that I would emphasize is support. So Dr. Samah Jaber emphasized this when she was saying that international solidarity is therapeutic. So it means a lot to the Palestinians, and they often say that to me as well. When they hear about international solidarity, and they feel so isolated, they feel that the international community is abandoning them. So having, a global community that is supporting them and sending them messages of support, especially now, is very, very important to them. So I would say keep in touch with people in Palestine, keep sending them messages of support. It really does make a difference to them. So the third thing that you can do to help is to educate yourself. I mean, this is even those of us who've been working with Palestine for a long time are constantly learning and constantly having to educate ourselves. So I know that a lot of you have asked for, books and materials from our speakers. So that we'll be sending you these. We'll be sending you the slides, and just keep educating ourselves, and then use this knowledge to educate others as well. There's been several requests for example, Martin Kemp to visit groups. So we'll keep you informed about this as well. For those of you who work in mental health, please, set up events like this for your networks and groups of professionals. You can invite Palestinians to speak over. You can invite UK-Palestine Mental Health Network. Just spread the word among the mental health community. The fourth one, the first thing that you can do is pass the mic, and by that I mean our priority should be to platform Palestinian voices and make sure that they are heard. So any opportunity, that is kind of linked to the point I made earlier, any opportunity that you can you have to kind of pass the mic to a Palestinian and give them the opportunity to describe the experience in their own words. And also, I think Jewish Israeli allies are very important people to platform as well. The fifth one that I would say is lobby. Lobby your MPs. I know sometimes it seems pointless, but your MPs are influenced, and they do have to take into account what their constituents are sending them. And if many constituents are sending them letters about Palestine, they do have to take note. I know that I was reading on Twitter that some MPs have said that the most number in the last few days, the greatest number of letters they've received have been about the situation in Palestine. So they are taking note, and it is just part of, another thing that you can do. Number 6, join in and connect. So, join your local Palestine Solidarity group. There's going to be a lot of vigils and protests in the next few days. There were a lot of them happening today. So join in, campaign, spread the word, keep the momentum going. And finally, a few of our speakers have mentioned this, the boycott, divestment and sanctions, which is an initiative. It was born from Palestinian civil society, inspired by South Africa, whether the boycotting South Africa at the time when it was under apartheid. Again, it's a very empowering way that you can play your part. And so yes, there's lots of things that we can do. So just to finish, I think the overarching message that came from this conference is that really mental health isn't some kind of like neutral sphere that's separate from social and political context. It's inextricably linked to human rights and activism, and we can't address mental health in the region without addressing the injustice and making an end to apartheid and settler colonialism. And then just to finish, I just like to comment on what a supportive, inclusive, and respectful space this has been today. I've just been amazed at how respectful it's all been, how inclusive, how warm, and it's kind of, even, you know, in the midst of these awful events that we're experiencing, that I must admit, I've been feeling very depressed about this the last few days. I just feel like really uplifted and inspired today by the, you know, the just having been together and knowing that we're all working together. And so I would just like to wish all the speakers, all the mental health workers who've been with us today, wish you all the best with the amazing work and the really valuable work that you're doing. And we are with you. Thank you.